All righty, here we are back live, coming to you live from the beautiful studios near Slades Corner, Wisconsin. My name is Bill Miksch. I'm president of WDMA Financial Group in Grays Lake, Illinois, where we protect your life, we protect your health, we preserve your wealth, and we guarantee an income for the rest of your life. And I couldn't say it if it weren't true. And with that in mind, I know Sean is going to be chiming in here in just a second. So welcome back, everybody, to this version, this section, this imitation of your Insurance Corner at 101.5 FM, WLCB, Slades Corner, Wisconsin. It is June 3rd of the year 2025. I'm going to share a couple of little tidbits here. Last week, it was a tough week for our family, folks. Doing what I do for a living came almost full circle. We had a couple of, at least I had, we had a death in the family of a family member that we're still kind of rearing or kind of taken aback, going, what the heck just happened? In fact, the other person who passed away was a friend of mine for over 30 years, and it's the same kind of thing. It just, what the heck just happened? So life has its journey, folks, and everything has an ebb and a flow, a beginning and an end. Everything. And all I can do is suggest to you, in the context of been doing this show for coming up on 5 years, coming this July, I think it's 5 years. The whole reason we started this show was to educate and instruct and give information that's real, that's timely, and that is useful to you in your lives, whether it's life insurance, health insurance, disability, long-term care. We've had a series of shows in the last couple of weeks on wills and beneficiaries and trusts, and we're going to talk about a specific kind of trust again tonight, charitable trusts, and then what's the process of setting up a trust. All of these things have a purpose. And at the end of the day, the instruction that you give to your family members or to your trustee or to your attorney or who's ever handling your estate and your affairs, those are instructions that are written in stone. Once you pass away, it becomes irrevocable. And a couple things that came about of this that kind of resonated with me was when you change a will or a trust, you have to make sure you also go back and check what your beneficiary statements say on your life insurance, your 401k, your investment accounts, your savings accounts, etc. Because if the will or the trust says, I'm going to have this stuff go to these people, and the beneficiary information is to a different set of individuals, the beneficiary trumps the will or the trust. Full stop. Unless, of course, those assets are inside the trust, then it's a slightly different dynamic, because if you put them in the trust, it is highly likely that when you put them in the trust, the attorney who's advising you said you need to change the beneficiary from these people to the trust of John Smith. Okay, so if stuff that you know wants to be distributed, like a house, for example, you would put the house inside the trust, and then the trust, once you pass, becomes irrevocable, and upon sale of the home, the trust assets, the money that you made from the sale of the house, the trust assets then are distributed accordingly. If you didn't do that, the house may have to go through probate, and that's a process in and of itself. Unless you've got a pour-over will where you actually put the house in the pour-over will, the house would go through probate, and then the same process is going to happen The trust is still dictating what happens, but you have to sell the house, and the house got to go through probate, and probate costs a few $1,000s likely for the attorney and the courts to deal with it. So it's a process. And when you're setting up a will or setting up a trust, it's not a static thing. It is a ongoing relationship between you, your spouse, and your family, and whoever the benefactors are of your estate. And the bigger the estate, the more complex it gets. The bigger the estate, the more complicated and the more intense it can get. Beneficiaries could easily change. Charities that you may have chosen may easily change. So it's a process, folks. It's not something that's done one time. And all of us, including yours truly, are guilty of these things. We get it done, we set it aside, and then life happens, right? And part of the job of an advisor, including yours truly, has to remember that if we're not necessarily the quarterback, but we're one of 11 people on the team, you should be asking these questions of your client, or vice versa. The client should be at least somewhat in tune with what's going on to say, hey, do we need to do this? Do we need to do that? Do we need to change this? Do we need to change that? And then that's going to prompt more questions and prompt more queries from both the attorney or your advisor and the person in question, or yourself, for example, and it needs to be dealt with. If you don't do those things, the state in which you live, and I don't care what state it is, the state in which you live will have its own probate process and will designate beneficiaries for which the assets will be distributed to. And it may be something that while you're 6 feet under, you may be rolling in the grave because you're like, that's not what I wanted. Stop. And the Almighty ain't going to give you a mulligan to go, I'll send you back so you can go fix it, and then I'm going to take you back again. Doesn't happen, folks. And if it does, it's only by the grace of God. So, not sure if Sean is trying to get in or not. I don't remember getting a text message, so while I'm just kind of perusing through here, I don't see anything from Sean, nothing from Sean, so he might be tied up a little bit. He might be joining us a little later. So again, welcome back, everybody. This is Your Insurance Corner, 101.5 FM, WLCB, Slade's Corner, Wisconsin. Up until now, we've talked about durable powers of attorney versus general powers of attorney. We've talked about the will. We've talked about different kinds of trusts, whether it's a revocable trust, a marital trust, an irrevocable trust like a qualified terminal income protection trust, which is specifically designed for spousal income. It's also, I call it the silver-tongued devil protection trust because the assets are protected by somebody trying to sweet-talk your surviving spouse from having somebody try to sweep her off her feet or his feet and take all the money. And so the one thing the other thing I want to point out about revocable trusts, revocable is revocable. Just like a will, it can be changed on the fly. You can change beneficiaries, you can add assets, you can take assets out. Particularly in a trust. In a will, it really doesn't matter, but in a trust, it does matter. You can move things around, you can take things out, pull things in, et cetera, et cetera. It is a process. It does cost a little bit of money to make that happen, but it will save a lot of time and headaches without having to go through the probate process, in my humble opinion. But once a person passes away, and let's just assume for the moment there's no surviving family members left associated with the trust, that trust then becomes irrevocable. At the time of death, it becomes irrevocable. Nothing can be changed at that point. So what it is what it is. And At that point, then the trustee opens the trust up after the funeral is completed, and maybe even before, because there may be instructions in the trust as to what's supposed to happen prior to the burial ceremonies and the funeral and the visitation and so forth. So the trustee is definitely going to be involved, and it's a lot of heavy lifting. But once it's done, once the person passes, I should say, it's an irrevocable trust. The key is thrown away, and whatever is in there is in there. It cannot be revoked. It cannot be removed, with the possible exception if somebody could prove that the decedent signed that trust under duress or signed it while they were not in capacity, meaning that they had memory issues or capacity issues, or to be more specific, they had dementia or Alzheimer's, or they're borderline, and the ability for them to be able to cognite with regard to decisions, if that could be challenged. But it's difficult to do because trusts are not a public domain, they're a private domain. If it's a will, same thing can occur, but the will is public, and it has to be out there for at least 3 to 6 months before any action can be taken on the estate. So just understand what it is that you are doing. Make sure you get good advice from good legal counsel and people that know what they're doing in this space, whether it's a financial advisor, an accountant, a lawyer, etc. Don't count on ChatGPT or Google to be your legal source. That is the last place you want to get advice. I promise you, you will make a mistake, and it will cause even more problems, because you can't go to Google and say, I'm going to sue you for giving me the wrong information. At the end of the day, all of these things should be done with a purpose and with professionals that know what they're doing, understand the moving parts, and are able and willing to stick around with you to make sure that whatever your wishes are at the end of your life are managed in a way that makes you happy and makes the family happy, or whoever the benefactors are to your estate. So with that said, we, in the context of talking about trusts, we're going to now specifically focus on charitable trusts. Now, a charitable trust, generally speaking, is an irrevocable trust. It's a legal arrangement where assets such as money, property, or investments are placed into the trust by the donor and managed by a trustee for the benefit of the charitable cause. The purpose of a charitable trust is to support one or more charity organizations or public causes like education, poverty relief, religion, health, animals. As long as they're a legit 501c3 charity, you can designate them as a benefactor in the trust. Tax benefits: the donors may receive a tax deduction for contributions, and the trust itself may be exempt from certain taxes, particularly estate taxes. I'll get to that in a second. The parties involved: the settler or donor, the person who creates the trust and donates the asset. So if I have an asset, let's say I have an investment account worth $5 million. And I want that $5 million to go to my university that I went to, Illinois Benedictine, which is now Benedictine University. I would set up that charitable trust and drop the investment into that charitable trust. And upon my death, they would receive the donation. The $5 million is in my estate. I'll get to how I'm using that money, if at all. But by virtue of it being in the trust, under certain circumstances, if that money is then released to the charity, it was and never was in my estate. So I've just reduced my estate tax burden by $5 million. So if I have a $20 million estate under current law, and I had $5 million of investment assets in a charitable trust, I now have a $15 million estate tax because the university I sent it to is going to get that $5 million donation. The trustee is the individual or institution responsible for managing the trust in accordance with its terms. So as the donor or settler, I'm going to be the one who establishes how the trust is supposed to be handled. Once I've defined how that trust is handled and I've signed off on it, it is now irrevocable. The beneficiaries generally are charitable organizations or causes that benefit from the trust. So again, as long as the charity is a legit charity and it's got a 501c39 status, you are going to be good to go. Common types of charitable trusts are charitable remainder trusts and charitable lead trusts. Charitable remainder trust is also known as a CRAT. A CRAT it provides a charitable remainder trust provides income to beneficiaries like the donor for a period. Then the remainder goes to the charity. So let's say, again, I put $5 million in the trust. Maybe it's an annuity that I put in there, ergo the word CRAT. And the annuity is kicking off income to me. Let's say the income is, just throwing out a number, let's say $100,000 a year. That's what it's throwing off. And I live for 7 years. So it was a $5 million fund. It's being managed, so it is invested per se. Maybe it did earn some money, but at the end of the day, it's $700,000 less than what I put in there. Actually, 700,000. It's more than that. It's let's see, 1.2, $100,000 a year. So $700,000, 7 years. I pass away. It's now $700,000 lighter. So maybe there's $4 million left in the account. What's left, the $4 million in this example, then goes to the charity. And here again, as I said earlier, if you're setting it up this way for the purpose of funding a charity and you want income out of the trust so that you've got livable income and lifestyle issues that you want to be able to maintain, the trust upon your death is instructed to pay the remainder of the balance of the asset to the charity. In my example, I'm using the university. So an income trust is a very common trust that's used for high net worth individuals or individuals that may not have a lot of family members or family members that they want to give the money to for whatever their reasons. They don't have to. And so the charitable remainder trust is either trying to help reduce the estate tax or just simply get rid of the asset without having to worry about estate taxes or anything. And it goes to a charity of your choice, and therefore it certainly has no estate tax issue tied to those assets, and it may not even have income tax consequences tied to those assets. The next charity is called a charitable lead trust. This kind of a trust pays income to the charity for a set period of time, 5 years, 10 years, whatever the definitions and the terms are of the charity, it will pay an income to the charity. The remainder, however, of the non-charitable of the trust upon death goes to the non-charitable beneficiaries or your heirs. So this is the kind of trust where you're going to give an income to a charity for a period of time, specifically defined in the trust, and then upon the terms being satisfied, the trust will sit there until until you pass away, typically, and those monies then go to your heirs. Because it's in a charitable lead trust, it should still be outside of your estate and escape estate taxes. Keep in mind that when a person passes away, the trust, no matter what, becomes irrevocable and still will have possibly some tax consequences, or at a minimum having to file a tax return on behalf of the trust. The trust literally becomes a living entity for purposes of taxation. There may not be much, if any, income tax consequence, but this is where you want to lean on your attorney. And in the estate planning world, you want to make sure the attorney, especially with stuff like this, understands tax law as much as he understands estate tax law, because the income tax piece is a critical portion of settling the estate, and you don't want to have your trustee or people that are responsible for managing your trust sitting out there holding the bag going, now what the heck did I do? There was no instructions to deal with this, or I didn't know I'd have to file a tax return. Again, these are fairly complex instruments that you want to make sure you pay attention to. And if you're doing it, again, for a couple reasons. One, you're trying to reduce your estate tax, let's put it this way. You're trying to reduce the assets in your estate, ergo reducing your estate tax consequence. The second would be you've got enough assets that the heirs are going to be fine, but you want to unload a certain amount of assets as a charitable giving at the time of your death for money to be given to the charity or charities of your choice. Or third, it's an income-driven thing wherein either you as the donor are receiving an income from the trust, or the charity is receiving an income from the trust, and then upon your death, the terms of the trust will either distribute the money to the charity or distribute the money to the surviving heirs who you've designated in the trust. And again, I cannot emphasize this enough, folks, especially given what just transpired this week. You got to make sure your beneficiaries are connected, and it is a very common thing for certain instruments to have one set of beneficiaries, another instrument to have another set of beneficiaries, and the person who's responsible for designating those beneficiaries didn't check. In some cases, because of the nature of the circumstance, it may not be something that even comes to your attention because of the youthful age of the person. You're not expecting them to die tomorrow. On the other hand, when it does happen, as I said at the beginning of the show, what the hell just happened? And then you start trying to connect the dots, and did we miss anything? Or what should I have asked a different question? What was there somebody else that should have been connecting the dots? What did you do as the decedent before you passed away? Were you engaged in it, or did you just go on automatic pilot? So, and as I said, the state in which you are living in has rules already set up if you don't have them. So at a bare minimum, make sure your beneficiary designations are up to speed. Make sure that at a minimum, the will that you have is designated accordingly and indicates what your wishes are at the end of life. And if you have a trust, the same thing. The one thing about a trust, which we're going to talk about at the top of the coming to the next half hour, is making sure that if you make a trust, it's just a shell of a document, and it's not worth the paper it's printed on until you start to put investment assets or whatever it is that you want to put in those trusts. So we're going to take a break here for a second. This is 101.5 FM, WLCB, Slades Corner, Wisconsin. This is your Insurance Corner, and we'll be right back after these short messages.